What's up, everybody? It's Bob's Three-Toed Warriors from Studio 1329 with the Word on the Street, Season 1, Episode 7, titled Better Than Michael Jordan? Well, why do I use that title, I ask? Because today I have Jordan. Say your last name, Jordan.
McNamara.
McNamara. Literally exactly like it looks. But I want
Pretty
to botch it.
close. Yeah, pretty close.
With me. What's going on, sir?
Not much. Just excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. Appreciate having you on. I'll take a little drink ski to that. My unofficial sponsor here.
I've got my coffee, so
that's all right. You have your coffee. I'll have my Mr. Beam. That's okay. So you can catch the podcast on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, just about everywhere else. And don't forget to subscribe. Give it a little 5-star rating. Helps out the show a ton. Really appreciate it. Jordan, where can they find your work?
You can find me on Twitter at McNamara Dynasty. I've got a variety of ventures going on right now. I've got the Analytics of Dynasty, the books, so the 2019 and the 2020 edition. Yeah. You can find my podcast, the Analytics of Dynasty podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. You can find all my Patreon content. So that's premium audio content. For example, I'm doing a podcast a day for June. I did this from basically like mid-March through like mid-May, and I'm picking it up with June, just doing a player value a day, which is really interesting in terms of like trade targets and stuff like that. So you can get all that. I've got some stuff I call real draft position over there too, which is real actual drafts, live, constantly updating. In terms of new picks that you can see, my dynasty tiers, all that stuff. I have a group me for my highest tier of patrons. So you can find that all at patreon.com/analyticsdynasty. And you can find me on the Audible, the Football Guys podcast feed with the Football Guys Dynasty show, where Chad Parsons and I have I think it's 7 episodes in now. So you can find that all over there. And we just had a show last night and it should have dropped today. So it's all fun, exciting stuff. Lots of different ventures going on.
That's awesome. So we're going to talk about some of those and some other things on the show today. So I found you and Chad and everybody else on the show on Under the Helmet. I think I've been listening for a good 3-4 years. Trying to think of, I think I'm in my 4th Dynasty season. Sounds right. So I think I've been listening the whole time. I wanted to find something, and I got hooked on you guys, and been very helpful to me. Greatly appreciated it. How'd you get involved with the Under Helmet, and how's that all work out?
Yeah, so it's funny, we had a get to know you UTH show and brought up old memories relatively recently. I started working with Chad in 2016, and just writing some articles and actually doing some Devi work. And him and I have been, I didn't know him from anyway. I was just a subscriber, and I said, I'd be interested in doing some writing if you have. And he was very gracious about it. And we built, I think we've become pretty good friends through it. He's an employer in one sense, but who I would consider a friend in another. And he's been really instrumental in helping me along, giving me opportunities at UTH, and then helping me, get on board at Football Guys. And now we host the Football Guys show. And he wrote the foreword to my book, the first one. So, of the people, I can't say enough good things about how Chad's treated me in this 4 or 5 years that I've known him. He's been great to me. So that was been a really good experience. And, and it's funny because it went from working on Debbie shows to, now we do all sorts of other things. It just is amazing from where it started to where I am.
Yeah, this fantasy community is pretty neat. How you bump into someone and all of a sudden you're working on projects together, and now it's 4 years later, right?
Yeah, and it's like it's the arc of it is something that I never truly expected, and to sort of be here now with this. I have the second book, and I've got the Football Guys Dynasty show, which is, a platform that I remember listening to when I was in college. I mean, that's
So the Football
15
Dynasty
years ago.
show, is that the YouTube video? Because I've been watching them on YouTube. That's the YouTube videos themselves, or are they also podcasts as
Yeah,
well?
it's the Football Guys has a podcast channel called The Audible, and so it's under that heading. It's a bunch of different podcasts, but yeah, it's a podcast through there, and I've listened to them since I was in college, and so now to 14, 15 years later to have a show on their platform, it's one of those things where you just kind of pinch me, this isn't real. So
Yeah.
it's been, and just to think that, I got that opportunity, it's a really, really awesome experience. And, I'm super grateful for it, and just have to sort of, capitalize when I get that opportunity.
Yeah. So quick question before I move on to a football guy's question. Well, it's still a football guy's question. Does Chad ever sit down, or is he sitting on a stool?
He's sitting on a stool.
Okay.
He's sitting on a stool.
He seemed a little too stationary not to be standing, but I'm like, he can't be just standing.
Yeah, it's funny because him and I, for, I don't know, 4+ years, never use camera when we record. We save the bandwidth and just talk.
Sure.
So he could have been standing on his head naked. I wouldn't have known the difference. And so when he turned when he turned the camera on, it's a totally different interaction, because you're reading body language, you're sort of, and it's funny. It's been that aspect of being on the camera has been different. But yeah, people ask me about that. Is he standing? He stood up for one show, but he
nice.
He sits on a stool. So
it's nice too, because you can see when people want to jump in, add, interact a little. So it's kind of cool. So you do some staff writing for the Football Guys. You did a strategy on larger lineups, talking dynasty there. I personally love having deep rosters. Without giving away your whole article, but the gist of it. Let's talk about that for a minute. So I'm assuming you also love having larger lineups yourself?
Yeah, I do.
Question mark.
I'll play anything. My ideal roster is deep. My ideal lineup is deep.
Sure.
And I like those because it's kind of like taking a hard test in college or a hard test in school. Like, there's only so many people that can that can get an A on a really, really hard test. But if it's easy, right, like you can get tripped up on a question, and if you're graded on a curve, like all of a sudden you get a B, and you were clearly one of the better players, or one of the better students. So that's kind of what it is with like larger lineups. Like it reduces your variance, so it reduces the luck factor, which is good if you are good, right? If you think you're good and you have an edge, which I think most of us do. And so, for instance, I love playing 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends, because those are deep waters to get.
I hate 2 tight ends.
Yeah,
I love Superflex. I hate 2 tight ends.
Taking people, and I like mandatory start 2 quarterbacks, because it's you get, and plus you make it like 40 man. Like, that's my favorite league. I've got Chad and I, interestingly, Chad and I own it's a 40 man co-own together, 40 man roster, 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends.
Okay.
And if it was me, I would add one more flex to the roster, but but that 2 tight end aspect, it just forces you to know a whole different level of position.
Yeah.
And so doing those things, and I think, getting into deeper lineups, getting into deeper rosters, even if it's not all of your leagues, it sharpens your skill. If mid-season last year, I knew who I could stream at tight end, because I was rostering, the 100th tight end in the league, and in that league, I just knew everybody. So it's a different, so that's a huge advantage when you get into shallower waters.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the deepest we go in offense only, super flex, is 25, a handful of taxis, a couple IR spots. So around 30 players, not 40, but around 30. But then we'll have, 3 flexes and a super flex or something like that. So I can see the definitely the advantage of having that deeper lineup versus the guy just starting studs only. 2
plus,
running backs, 2 wide receivers.
Right. And I know with like those, like especially with the deeper lineups, deeper rosters, like on the back end of those rosters, I can sort of optimize, right? Because I sort of, through my studies and I have what I would consider a pretty simple process, at least to me, for me to execute it. Once I get my game plan down in terms of rookie draft, it's pretty clinical. But I can just sort of implement that. And, so I know, for example, like, day 2 or round 2 tight ends, like those are really good values. And so last year, like 5th round of a 2 tight end league, we're taking Drew Sample, which who cares in a start 1 league where you're starting, where you got 22 man rosters, but when you're that deep, like, that there's a huge advantage having a profile like that. So it's a really interesting, like, that's why I love it, because it forces you to make deeper decisions, and it forces you to know more.
I like it. I like it a lot. Expand those brains, people.
Totally.
And when you're trying to expand those brains, probably want to get some more information, listen to a man's Patreon shows. So you kind of mentioned earlier a little bit about the Patreon shows, but break it down a little more for us. What do people get when they sign up for your Patreon shows? What do they get for what do they get?
Yeah, so I have 3 different tiers.
Okay.
So up at the top, you get everything. So I call that my champion patrons. They get everything, including a group me, including all the podcasts. I have a data package. So I've got real draft position. I've got rookie draft position that's updating. It's not rookie draft position updating anymore, but we knew, like, up to the minute, right? Like, one of the things that I've really found is that ADP is valuable, but only so much, right? It gives you an idea, but there's only 5 or 6 people and 5 or 6 mock drafts in ADP. And if you start them at the beginning of the month and release them by, the middle of the month, it's already stale. And, you've got some biases in terms of that. So I just said to myself, is there something that I can offer that's different? That's maybe that there might be some fidelity in that can really, be different. And so I've figured out a way to track leagues. And so we knew up to the minute, where players were going, which was really interesting because, I could see them coming in across all these leagues, and I can in startup drafts too. And that, right, it was different than what was being talked about, right? What was actually happening versus what rookie rankings were saying, and what, rookie ADP was saying was different. And knowing that was immensely valuable. Right. And so we were able to know, people said there's a big 7 tier. Well, that actually wasn't true. And so knowing that puts you at a huge strategic advantage if you were trying to trade into it. So
how big or small was it here?
It was at 8.
Okay.
It was at 8. So 60, I think it was 65 or 66% of the time you could get one of those top 7 rookies in Superflex at 8. Right. Okay. So that basically meant that, 2 out of 3 teams, 2 out of 3, 2 out of 3 leagues of wide receiver was cracking that top 7.
Somebody was reaching and grabbing one.
Yeah. And so to know that is really valuable, because you don't have to trade from, right? If you're at 8, you don't have to, like, if you want to trade up, you can, but sort of what the benefit is or what the cost is. And, and the move was really from 9 to 8 was the big one, because only about 10% of the time you got one of those top 7 at 9. Whereas at 8, you got it, I think it was like 66% of the time, 67, something like that. So that's a huge difference. And that was really valuable. So, and I do that with startup drafts too. And I'm in a startup draft right now, and I know what the odds are that a player's going to fall to me, like at my next pick. And that's immensely valuable, because I can make all of those decisions based on, whether it's roster construction or should I trade up? Should I move back?
Sure.
How should I sort of put it all together? So that's all the data you can find there. So it's really valuable. And then I have dynasty tiers, which are a different take on rankings that incorporate some of the numbers from my book into it. And then I have, like I said, I have a whole bunch of podcasts. I'm doing a podcast a day. Through the month of June, I've done Julio, Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, Stafford Locke. One other, I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, but I'm doing just different ideas on value, because I think that those, tactical decisions are pretty interesting and pretty. There's not a lot going on right now, so those are pretty. Those are interesting topics, I think. And so you can find all that, like all the podcasts, everything but the group me is $10 a month. And then if you want to do $4 a month, it's basically a podcast or two a week. And any associated writing that goes on there, although it's 85, 90, probably 95% of the stuff is actually audio content.
That's awesome. Well, y'all heard the man. That means y'all need to jump on there and support the man. So it's got some good stuff for you. Here's a question that I have, which is not on here, but you kind of alluded to it, but didn't allude to it when you're talking here. So for someone like yourself who does a lot of study, you kind of build your own rankings, tiers, etc. You kind of know where people are being taken, where you want to take people. Do you ever, and I think it's going to depend on the league you're in, it's probably more beneficial if you know this owner's a novice owner or it's more of a novice league. But do you ever pull ADP alongside your numbers and kind of see, okay, these guys are pretty much falling in line with ADP. I know what I want over here, and I kind of know what they're doing. Do you ever mix the two when you're drafting? You know what I'm saying? Kind of get in their head a little, or is it too dangerous, or you're just, the league you're in, they don't mess with that kind of stuff. They have their own thing.
I'm not sure it's predictive enough or that you can necessarily identify it's happening when it's happening, right? So I'm in a startup draft right now. I know two of the people in it. They don't know me, right? Sorry, let me take that back. They know me, but they don't know that my team is me. So I have a pretty good idea what they're going to do.
Yeah, that's always fun.
So, so that's one thing, but it's tough to get a true track on owners or anything like that. Okay. If I know someone, what's interesting to me is I don't pay a ton of attention to this, but my patrons do. My patrons really track this. And, in the group me, it's continuously going on. It's really interesting. Like I don't track it just because I track other things, but what they do is they have a really good idea on what system people are using. Right. Yeah. So if people are making trades, if they're using different resources, they pick up on it really quickly. I mean, like really quickly, like within a trade offer, like they kind of know, which is wild. And so some of the conversations back and forth, like it's almost above my head in terms of what they're talking about. But they are really able to exploit that. And it was funny because I sent an offer one time in and I just took a picture. I said, this seems odd. And they said, this is such and such a resource. And I was like, really? And I was like, all right, give me some ideas. And so they were, so that stuff is interesting. But I don't track it super close unless there's something obvious happening.
Yeah. No, I've made a mistake before because I have a friends and family league. And for those who don't do it, the best thing you can do in the world is get your wife to play fantasy football with a bunch of other couples that she enjoys hanging out with, and it makes your world a lot easier. But when you do that,
just make sure the neighbors are in for like 3 figures. That's what I got to
do. When you do that and you give her your same draft big board, basically, and you're by the turn on with her, you're like, okay, I think I know what my wife's going to take. She's like, I got to pull something different here or grab early or something. That's kind of what I was getting at. But
yeah.
So you seem a little analytical, and you have a show called The Analytics of Dynasty Pod. I listened to a recent episode, and you were talking about precautions with the coronavirus. And I listened to a few different podcasts because I enjoy it. It's a great thing to do when you're driving to work or working on the lawn, whatever. It's a great thing. So, and I feel like it's an uncommon trend, people talking about that strategy you were taking. And it's almost like, duh, it makes sense. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I guess generally speaking, so this might sound counterintuitive, but I don't think that I can necessarily pick players better than the average person can. Okay. I just think it's really, really difficult to do that. And it might sound, I have a book and all these things. I'm supposed to be able to do that. Right. I think a lot of it's random. I really do. And I am almost to a fault will say, do I have strong feelings? Yeah, I do. But by and large, so much that happens is fluky. Sure. In terms of, let me couch that in this, and like on the margins it is, right? The idea that, draft pedigree is such a big predictor of what's going to happen, right? Just frankly, that's the easiest thing. If you were to just know one thing about a player, where they went in the NFL draft, it's going to make an enormous impact. Just having that information. But so much of, like Lamar Jackson last year, like it was an extremely lucky season. Like, don't get me wrong, it was a great season, but it was extremely lucky.
Right.
And it's really tough to predict those things. I mean, Dak Prescott quarterbacked an offense that led the league in total yardage, and his touchdown rate was average, right? His touchdown rate was average. So you would think that, his touchdown rate would be above average because the team was the best offense in football last year, but he just got sort of held to a neutral touchdown rate and ended up being the quarterback too. Right?
Yeah.
If you sort of flip those two things and he gets a handful of the breaks that Lamar Jackson does, Lamar Jackson doesn't get some of the stuff that he does in terms of the passing numbers, which are just totally unsustainable. You flip their touchdown rates, Dak Prescott outscores Lamar Jackson by 200 points. And those things are fluky year over year, right? So a lot of that's not predictable. What I do think is, or controllable, and we don't have a great pulse on just because it's out of our control. What I do think we have a really good control on, and where I find a lot of value, is the strategic aspect of it, right? Okay. So knowing the profiles to pick is really important. And I always say profiles are more important than players.
So what do you mean by profiles?
What type of profile does a player represent? So, for instance, in my book, I talk about base rates and density rates. So,
the next two questions, great.
Yeah, funny how that should go. But so I know, for example, like the hit rate for running backs drafted in the first round of the NFL draft is 77%. So that means 77% historically since 2000 have produced a top 24, at least one top 24 season in their career.
3 out of 4, basically.
Yep. Which is pretty good. And recently it's been even better than that. I think the last person to miss has been Donald Brown, and that's a while ago. So, so it's been pretty good. And sort of as it goes down, as your rounds go down, it goes down. But what I think is really interesting, what I looked a lot about in this book is, what I call base rates. So we know that a rookie coming in at 77%. Well, what happens if they miss in year one? What's that change to, right? What happens if they miss in year 2, year 3, right? You sort of look out, and as a player has missed, that, you look at their pedigree and you can tell sort of historically what the arc of those players are at that point, which is really valuable information for me. For my readers and subscribers, it's very valuable because you sort of get the arc. Once a player hits, it's a totally different conversation. And that's really, I think, breaking those two things up was probably the biggest thing that I did in the Analytics of Dynasty 2, or 2020, which was at my first book, I just looked at what the average was. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't tell you how to change once a player hits, because then they're in a different strata, and you sort of have to know those things. So those are
Parker big conversation.
What's that?
Would that be your Parker conversation?
Devontae Parker?
Hitting.
Yeah,
that kind of deal.
Yeah, he represents
example of a player trying to make it more tangible. So
yeah, Kenny Galladay is really the guy for me on this because. Yeah, but if you go back and you sort of say, all right, like I think it's 22% for third round wide receivers. So I was sort of poo-pooing him. He hits, right? And I'm like, all right, well, he is an above average return, right? So, all right, so that's kind of fluky. I didn't adjust enough. I guess it was after the first book, I didn't adjust enough. So now I sort of know, and what I call density is once you hit, how dense is that hit, right? How deep does it go? And you can see, again, it's a huge correlation to draft pedigree, but you can sort of get an idea of what kind of arc a player is on just by knowing his profile, right? So take away the name, just give me their draft pedigree, and one thing I'm going to look at is how old they are in my research this summer, but their draft pedigree and their hit, and then sort of get an idea of what those guys do. And then, so that gives me a base number, base rate or density rate. And then just say, okay, now I like Kenny Galladay more than this, or I like him less than this, but it gives me a really good starting point. So all that is to say, I use a lot of profiles and a lot of strategic stuff more than I try and pick players, right? So I'm trying to pick profiles and pick players that represent those profiles. So that's how I sort of look at it. And I don't try and do like picking players very often. I think it's really, really tough to do and get consistent value in.
But come on,
all that is
we
to say,
we get emotionally hung up on players and names and OBJs and Julio Joneses, and it's in our heart. Those players are just stuck with us,
Yeah,
It's emotional.
I agree with that. And admittedly, I'm pretty unemotional about it. Like I have my guys. Like the best call I ever made was Alvin Kamara. Like without like even remotely a debate about that. He's the best call I ever made. And a lot goes into that. Like I'm lucky to a large extent, like, all of that stuff. But like I'll always have that with Alvin Kamara, right? Like, Alexander Madison will always be a player that I have a high admiration for, just because I took him, I challenged someone who plays at the volume that I did last year, who had any player more than I had him last year, right? Like you sort of get those attachments, but that's more of, just for me, it's more of I get attached to the profile and he represent, and so all that is to say, to work it back to the COVID for a second, that's a lot about how I look at the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's think about how we can get strategic edges and get players that reflect those edges, right? How do we sort of get that edge in play? Well, roster construction is a huge part of it, right? And so I've looked a lot at that in my book about just the positions that you select, not the players, but just what type of positions you put on your roster. So I did some simulations and stuff and came to some really different conclusions than dynasty, what I would consider, historical strategies have suggested. I came to some very different conclusions, right? And so I think I sort of look at it as, from a strategic lens, how do I sort of differentiate myself, right? How do I sort of find stuff that the market, other owners aren't doing, right? So my rosters look vastly different from most rosters in terms of the positional allocation. And, with this COVID thing, I think people are underreacting to it pretty significantly in a couple of critical areas. I did a poll on it, and I think it was, 3 out of 10 people said, that's impacting their strategies. 7 out of 10 didn't. This was relatively early on, so maybe it's changed. I could redo it, but it has to I think it should really change how you think about it, because it makes certain profiles more important, right? So there is no training. There has been no mini camps. There's been no OTAs, right? So guys like in Darrell Henderson, I don't want to pick on Darrell Henderson.
That's right. He's on one of my rosters. You can pick on him. I'll listen.
Yeah, and so I just think of different players through different rules. I just sort of name the rule for him. But a guy like Darrell Henderson, to me, it represented a concerning profile coming into this year, which was, he was overbought in rookie drafts. I think based on his pedigree and all that stuff, like he shouldn't have been drafted where he was drafted.
Sure.
Todd Gurley gets shipped off. They cut Todd Gurley, and people project him to be the next best thing.
Sure.
This was probably more of a conversation pre-Cam Akers, but I said to myself, that's expecting a lot from a player that, frankly, showed very little in his rookie season. And what I mean, not just that he didn't produce, right? But the Rams, and I cover the Rams for Football Guys, the Rams don't play anyone. I mean, anyone in preseason games. When I say anyone, I mean they don't play their fourth wide receiver, let alone their top three. They don't play their second tight end, let alone their first. And they don't play their backup quarterback. Their entire starting line, their entire defense, none of their starters or anyone relevant plays.
I did not know that.
Who was out there running around? Darrell Henderson.
Okay.
And
tells a lot.
Yeah. And so, but what that means to me is, everyone projected him to have this Kamara-like role. it really spoke to me that was what was happening with him, because, their backup running back, Malcolm Brown, wasn't out there, right? It was Darrell Henderson that was out there.
Okay.
And so what it spoke to me is that he had a really tough time transitioning to the NFL, and he doesn't get on the field very much in his rookie season. Well, you would expect a year or two bounce, but why? Well, you would expect a year or two bounce because, you're getting more training camp, right? He's maybe struggled to pick up the playbook. Maybe he just wasn't, you struggled to convert to being a professional, right? All of those sort of just pure developmental aspects of it, you're not getting now, right? So I think that players like Darrell Henderson, or, taking, a step forward in terms of any guys taking a year two jump, Kyler Murray, people are making huge bets on Kyler Murray right now.
Sounds like the Baker Mayfield bets from last year.
It sounds exactly like the Baker Mayfield bets, and I like Kyler Murray, and probably I like Kyler Murray more than I like Baker, and I really like Baker, right? So, but at the cost, right? And he's not getting that practice time. He's not getting the bomb with DeAndre Hopkins. All of these things are things you're not getting. And so I think keeping those things in mind, again, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? I'm not sure. I'm leaning to the fact that this is going to hurt those types of situations.
Sure.
I also think it's going to create an injury risk, because guys like Darrell Henderson is an example. But I mean, just think about, for me, I've been locked in my house since, get out a little bit, but since March, I think it was 16th, was when my doctor took me out of work.
You're not in football shape either.
Listen, I've actually done what I would consider fairly well. Like, I've lost weight, but it was more dietary change since the beginning of the year. Like, I am in, a better, I am physically, I probably am in better shape in terms of I've lost weight and those sorts of things. But come on, we can't, no gym, right?
Right.
Like, I'm trying to bike, all those things, but I think for everyone and for your listeners, right, you can sort of put yourself in that situation where you just haven't done the normal things you're doing. Well, that translates to football too. And, and some of these guys, some of the, DeAndre Hopkins is going to come into camp in shape, right? We don't have to have a concern about that, but some of these guys aren't. And what happens with that? We know that one of the riskiest times of the year for players in terms of ACLs, in terms of soft tissue injuries, is right at the beginning of camp, because they're not ready physically.
Sure.
I think we might have a systemic problem in terms of, it's called conditioning injuries. I think that might be a massive, massive problem. And you look in a normal year, 24, of the top 24 running backs in seasonal ADP coming into the year, you expect about 40% of them to miss 4 or more consecutive games with an injury. And so about 9 of them.
Yeah.
I think it could be more than that this year. I think there's a risk that it could really jump up,
Sure.
in terms of all those injuries. And what happens if Patrick Mahomes gets COVID-19?
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's the big thing in terms of, I'm not a doom and gloom type, but I think if you're looking for an edge,
yeah.
And it's tough to talk about a little bit, but you have to deal with the reality of what you're faced with, which is there's a ton of risk. And so trading up in drafts right now to get Kyler Murray, for example, is like the worst type of bet I think you could make. And for me, trading down in a startup draft is usually advisable. This year, I think it makes even more sense, right?
Sure.
Some of the decision-making on future picks, I have thought this year that there's actually some value, and I've never thought this. I think there's some value in using first-round picks next year to get into startup drafts this year. I think I think people aren't trading up quite as much. So if you are going to trade up, I think you have more options to do it with, is what I would, so it's a little bit of a contrarian strategy. You might find a better market. But I'm not really doing that because I want to have the liquidity of the pick, right? Because that pick's not going to get injured. That pick's not going to get COVID-19. Right. I can use that pick to fill in quarterback X if someone gets hurt. All
it's
those
also
things.
worth a hell of a lot more in 12 months.
Yeah, it is. It might be, right?
Right.
But like,
Yeah.
it could
Typically
be. Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah, and it's safer, right?
Yeah.
It is objectively safer because the pick doesn't get hurt, right? So so all of those things, I mean, I think thinking about those things and having, a strategic thought process in mind about the reality of what we're facing, it's just different.
Yeah.
And we have to deal with the risks, and what happens if you're dependent on a guy like, I have a statistic called WARP, which is wins over replacement. If you're depending on Patrick Mahomes and Superflex to juice you up 2.5 wins over replacement, which is a pretty big number, but it's certainly attainable for like a quarterback 1 or 2 finish. I mean, that one bet on one player, right? You have to think about how to make the rest of your roster a little bit more resilient than just
Sure.
depending on that. Because, what if Tyreek, all of the implications, there's so much risk. So I just think trying to build more resiliency into your rosters is a huge thing right now.
I like it. I love it. So I'm going to give a quick little, you mentioned listeners earlier. I'm going to give a little quick mention on my listener league. Listener league that we're firing up. So I mentioned on the last show, we're gonna give 2 drawing spots for people who do 5-star reviews and screenshot that, send them to me on Twitter at Bob's 3toad. And the next 2 winners will be people that send me the funniest original messenger story. So I don't want you to go scour the internet for some comedy, although I'll still take it. And I probably won't know it's not yours. But make me laugh and see if we can get you into the league. So it's gonna be a good time. We're gonna do an auction draft. That's always fun. Planning on doing 12 teams, maybe more, but probably just 12 teams. We'll see where it goes. But be creative, have a good time. I'll announce the first winner on next Friday's show. They'll record it on Thursday, so make sure you get that in. And that first winner will be based off of people that make me laugh. So you mentioned earlier you love 2 quarterback leagues and 2 tight end leagues for that matter. Superflex, also a fan of?
Yep.
Okay. And is that do you mostly just do dynasty? Like, okay, how many leagues are you in? Let's just get to that.
I think I'm in 26 right now. I'm in 26 leagues.
I did that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I did 14 last year, and I said, okay, I'm going down to 5.
Okay.
We'll see if I can stay there by the time the season kicks off. But so far, I've done good, and I've left it at 5. 2 dynasty, 2 home leagues, 1 listener league that I got to defend my title in, and I guess I'm already at 6. I just fired up my own listener league, so dang it. So that's a lot of leagues, mostly dynasty, mix of redraft. What's kind of your ratio there?
Yeah, I played in, I want to say there was 2 redraft. I can't think of what the other one was. I know I played in 1 redraft league last year.
So not many.
Yeah, I think maybe there was a second one. I played in Scott Fishbowl last year.
Nice.
I think I
play in one.
Invite
to that.
What's that?
I didn't get an invite to that.
I haven't gotten my invite yet this year either.
It's right next to mine somewhere.
Yeah, I think I'm on the outside looking in on this year. But yeah, I played in my former golf partner has a league that I play in. I played in with him, and that was my only redraft league. I have a home league that's it's not really dynasty. It's a 7-man keeper, 16 teams. So that's interesting.
It's almost dynasty. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish it was like, I want to go 12 deep.
Sure.
But I can't convince people to amp it up. I would want to go 25 deep, but I can't get people to
one
amp
step
it up.
at a time.
Yeah, exactly. So that I've been in for, I think it's been 20 years. It's been more than 20 years, probably close to 25 actually. Okay. I think it's 96, 97, somewhere in there that I started. So that's where I started playing fantasy. And outside of that, everything else is dynasty.
Okay. So here's a question. And we'll look at it through a dynasty lens. But any key strategies that you like to use when you're addressing the quarterback position? And that's going to definitely differ in 1 quarterback versus the 2 / super flex. But maybe it doesn't differ at all in the 2. But do you have a typical strategy that you like to to roll with?
Um,
Probably also depends on roster size and everything else under the sun too. So
yeah, I mean, in terms of, yeah, I'm pretty tight with my board in terms of quarterbacks. Yeah, I think that people get, how should I say this? I think overall, I think people make too risky a bets in Superflex.
sure.
And what I mean by that is betting on Drew Lock over Matthew Stafford, for example, is just a ridiculous idea.
People hate all the old reliables. They want the young guy.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, historically, that is just a horrible bet. It's a horrible bet. Yeah, the much more likely outcome is that Matthew Stafford will be a starter going significantly into the future, and Drew Lock will lose his job in the offseason, right? Like,
I am a Broncos fan, and the quarterback whisperer. Yeah, it's probably true.
Yeah, and listen, like, I don't have a problem with Drew Lock. I just have a problem again with his profile, right? That is not a very durable profile, and basically the average, if you don't hit for a top 12 seasonal finish for a round 2 quarterback, you expect about 20 starts in your career is about the number, which isn't very many, and which would put Drew Lock right at the threshold. I think he'd have 20 if he started 16 games this year. I think he started 5 last year. That's at the number. So this is his runway, right? I mean, he's got to go this year. And again, looking at him, I mean, it's the same argument I made earlier, right? Do we really expect this day 2 quarterback to make a huge jump this year? Is this the year we expect that to happen? I don't. And so for me, a lot of it is, this. I bet on things to stay largely the same at the quarterback position because historically that has been true, right? It's the same guys. The guys that finish with top 6 finishes, they do it a lot.
Yeah.
And it's if there's 1 or 2 a year that you get, and I don't think we're particularly good at picking which one's right. I mean, go back a couple of years ago, right? Let's go back to that class with Mayfield and Darnold and Rosen and Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And who by consensus was the least valuable, the 5th quarterback in that class in rookie drafts? It was Josh Allen. Okay. And depending on your format, Lamar Jackson was a little bit different depending on how you sort of thought about him.
Lamar went at the end of the first round, and Allen went in the second round in our Superflex.
Yeah, and I mean, he was, I would think Darnold and Rosen sort of went ahead of him. It depends. It was a little, there was some difference there, but I think universally Josh Allen was a QB5. But Lamar Jackson certainly wasn't a QB1. I'd say I'd have to go back and look. I think he was either the 3rd or the 4th off in terms of ADP. And who are the most 2 valuable now, right? And that's 2 years. It has a massive difference in terms of, and listen, I have questions about Josh Allen. Like I spent 6 months ragging on him from leading up to the draft, and then all of a sudden he goes in the top 10 and to my favorite team and becomes just this massive value in rookie drafts. And then I'm like, all right, I have to be in because that's the right bet. And yeah, do I think he's a long-term, elite dynasty quarterback? I think there's questions about that, but he has been very, very, very good for fantasy so far in his career. He's not there all the way there yet, but in terms of what I look at, but I mean, he's the number 2 now after Lamar Jackson. So, I mean, and where's Mayfield? Where's Rosen? I mean, where's Darnold? You know what I mean? And so you look at those things. And so I think there's a ton of uncertainty, especially for the guys that haven't hit. Like the guys that haven't hit are a crapshoot's probably too strong of a word for it. But I mean, and that's like this year, I'm probably going to write an Analytics Dynasty 3. And one of the decisions I faced last night is probably going to be a big part of it. In the startup draft that I'm in, I didn't really plan on targeting a rookie quarterback this year. I think I roster total. I've done 4 startup drafts so far this year, and I have done all of my rookie drafts, and I think I rostered total 3 rookie quarterbacks. total in terms of total shares.
Okay.
Just because, it's not a good bet in rookie drafts this year, and, just the value hasn't been right.
Yeah.
But, I'm then I'm on the clock at 9:12, and Justin Herbert staring at me at like quarterback 27. And I was like, I have to do that. Like you have to take him there. Like you have to do that. And so, I think, again, looking at profiles, I think the profile is really, really important. So avoiding the traps in Drew Lock, what I would consider a trap in Drew Lock, and some of these guys who haven't hit yet, like Darnold. People get over their skis with Darnold, for example, and heck, Baker. I mean, Baker, 47% of quarterbacks that have gone in the top 10%, let me start this over. Of the quarterbacks that have gone in the top 10 of the NFL draft and have entered year 3 of their career without a top 12 seasonal finish in terms of total points, only 47% of them hit at some point for a top 12 season.
That's coin flip.
Yeah. If you go to if you kick it out a year, right? So if they miss this year, it goes down to 11%.
Oh.
So you're standing on a cliff, and looking into the abyss.
Yeah. When
you're taking Darnold, when you're taking Mayfield, and that's not to say they can't work out, but people thinking that Darnold is the oracle, and I hear this talk about Darnold being, really, really good. He's got to show it this year, right? Yeah. I mean, it is a this year thing, and I get he's young and all that stuff. Historically, this is it. I mean, you have to do it this year in terms of, it's a really low bet going after this.
Yeah. So since you play in so many dynasty leagues, every once in a while, I assume that you have adopted an orphan team, as many fantasy listeners out there do.
Yep.
Do you have a general approach? And this could be a whole show in itself, so we won't do that. But do you have a general approach in how you kind of, because some orphan teams are studs, but most of them are not. Most of them are duds.
Right.
That's why the people jump ship and left.
Right.
Cowards. But do you have a general approach you'll kind of break down the team?
Yeah, I actually wrote an entire chapter of it in my first book. I did a breakdown of a team that I adopted as an orphan. And it was really interesting because I went back and I sort of looked at it, and I made mistakes. Like there was probably the worst trade I've ever made was in there. And I have to go back and look exactly what it is, but it was horrible in hindsight. I think I traded Devonta Freeman and like Tevin Coleman and whatever it was. I ended up getting a 1-pick upgrade. That's essentially what I got for like the price of Devonta Freeman. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. That was the year that Devonta Freeman was running back 1. So yeah, it was. So I made some mistakes, right? But it was a learning experience, and honestly, I think the best way to learn how to play dynasty isn't to start up; it's to adopt orphans. And I have a subscriber who I stay in relatively close contact with, just in terms of picking his brain, and he plays in like 700 leagues, and basically does it as like an investment type thing, which is a super compelling and interesting idea. And one of the things that he always says is that adopting an orphan, that I usually can get him cheaper, so that's a big part of it for him. But the other thing too is that it forces you to be good, right? And it forces you to make different decisions. Taking a lot of risk when you're building an orphan makes a lot of sense. And again, if you ever struggle with trading, right? If you're struggling with making trades, go adopt a couple of orphan teams, right? Especially if you can get them at a discount, like these sites that have, basically commercially do dynasty, they have orphans every year. Go adopt 1 or 2, right? And you get them, 40% off, 60% off, whatever. Take a bad one and just work on trading, because you have nothing to lose, right? Yeah. This isn't your team. You have nothing sunk into it. And just trade it, and just trade everyone. Just try and trade everyone, right? Just send offers and offers and offers. And I think one of the best things I ever did was get into doing that, because it forces you to make trades and look at profiles and look at trying to get discounts but forcing you to make make offers, because that's really how you do it.
Sure.
For me, if I'm adopting an orphan, I try and take on as much risk as I can. And what I mean by that is, smartly. So not just haphazard risk, but
sure.
I take a lot of boom bust running backs. That's something I do across my dynasty profile generally, but those can kickstart your rebuild really quickly. So if, Dalvin Cook gets injured, Alexander Madison can win you a game and a half over replacement in a season or a 10-game sample, right? I mean, that's what James Conner did.
Sure.
When, in a 10-game sample, that's what James Conner did that year that Le'Veon Bell held out, right? So, like, those things can make a massive impact and a turnaround in whether you keep that player or trade him for a profit or whatever, those doing that, I think, makes a ton of sense. So taking those types of profiles, again, that are good pedigree bets, right? So he's a day 2 running back, having those make a ton of sense. So trying that. I think pick liquidity is a huge thing, right? So if you can get guys that are replaceable, or guys that are, your James Whites of the world who are sort of floor level valuable but don't have huge upside, getting a pick for them, makes a lot of sense. So doing that, I think just being really active, hitting the waiver wire really hard, and constantly churning it over, I think makes a lot of sense. And just looking for, being willing to buy low on players too. I mean, it's the ultimate opportunity to buy low and sell high, really, because, if you're not, and I think you can try and really turn around a team in 12 to 18 months, right? So if you adopted it right now, I'd look to try and have a team that can make the playoffs next year. And so, if I don't know, if I was doing it last year and AJ Green got hurt, and wasn't, was holding out, getting him as a player that I could potentially have at a discount and who could offer some 2020 viability for me would make a lot of sense, and again, this year with the injury risk, I mean, I think this is a good opportunity to try and implement that type of strategy.
I like it. Here's a listener question from a listener of your shows, me. So let's say you had the 101 in a draft, but you could only keep the player for 3 years, maybe 4, but probably 3 years. And you have a good roster, and you want the best you can out of the guy for this year or the next 2 years. Who are you snagging with that 101, assuming you can't trade down?
You're talking rookie drafts?
Huh?
You're talking rookie drafts?
In a rookie draft, yep.
Jonathan Taylor.
Going JT, huh?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, he's my clear 101 in this class.
Okay. Yeah, I know him. I know they were, and then you hear all the CEH talk, and it's like, what are people, so.
Yeah, he's my clear 101 in this class.
Okay, good. Here's my ask all questions I ask everybody who comes on the show. Okay. So this is a more of a redraft question, definitely, than a dynasty question. But who's one quarterback, one running back, one wide receiver that you could see finishing in the top 5 for the season, but you're able to draft around 13th, well, not around, but basically 13th or later at their position? Quarterback's probably going to be super easy, but maybe a little trickier when you get to the next 2.
Quarterback that's drafted that late. Goff, I think, is interesting that late. Phillip Rivers, I think is pretty interesting how late he's going.
That's 18 and 22 on the sheet I'm looking at. So yeah, that's a nice steal for someone who could finish that high.
Yeah,
even if they don't finish that high, it's a nice steal.
Yeah, and I mean, I would take. I mean, in Superflex, I love Phillip Rivers because, I mean, he was very good last year, but for his touchdown rate, essentially, from a fantasy perspective. So he was, and people are thinking he's in decline. It doesn't appear that way via his stats. I mean, he's in decline probably physically as any quarterback his age would be, but I don't think in terms of productivity. I think last year was fluky in terms of his numbers, and he was still, I think, finished quarterback 15. But Goff I think he led the league or was tied with the league lead and passing attempts. I think he had 626 or something like that. I think it was tied with, I can't remember exactly who it was.
It was up there. I'd have to check. Yeah, sounds right.
But again, he had a low touchdown rate too. So both of those things, that touchdown rate is really fluky year over year. And so when it's low and you have a ton of volume, which both of those guys did last year, right? I bet on that to bounce back. And so those are two of my favorite guys that deep. Running back, I mean, give me.
Go on PPR, half PPR, or standard? What do you? Which
I play PPR. I mean, I would say from super deep. I mean, give me a backup type. So I guess my three favorites in this would be Madison, Murray, and Pollard.
Okay.
Are guys from deep that I think, if there was an injury, and the beauty about running back is you don't need the injury to be very long, right? And you can, in short sample sizes, make up massive differences in terms of value. I mean, Alvin Kamara missed 2 games last year, and in those 2 games, Latavius Murray was running back 1 for those 2. And over the course of a 13-game regular season, which is how I measure my WARP numbers, Latavius Murray had over a half a win over replacement in 2 games.
You said 13 games?
What's that?
You said 13-game season?
Yeah, it's over a 13-game regular season, fantasy regular season. That's how so he was, I mean, that's an unbelievable, I mean, that's 3 WARP pace, which is just and no one has ever done that, ever. People don't get to 2.5. And so that, I mean, just think about how that's a very robust difference. And, so you're probably in that short sample size going at least 1-1, if not 2-0. Yeah, so guys like that. If I had to take a receiver to finish in the top 5 at his cost, I don't think there's anyone after him or anyone really near him that could do it other than Will Fuller. And listen, the Will Fuller case is very simple.
Stay on the field.
Stay on the field but I mean, people forget how good he has been when healthy. And there was that pace where Watson went just ridiculous, and a lot of that was like Will Fuller was averaging like a touchdown and a half a game.
I had just picked him up off the waiver wire, and I was loving it.
Right, for like a 4 or 5 game stretch there, and then Watson got hurt. I think Watson got hurt in practice, if memory serves. But yeah, anyways, so I think Will Fuller, like, if given 16 games, absolute like.
It's a big if, but I like it.
Before Brandon Cooks came there, I said, like, that's one of my favorite bets in all of fantasy. And it's the clarity of it's awesome, because any week that Fuller's healthy, I'm playing him, right? Yeah. Any week, virtually, unless I have some crazy receiver situation that I'm just stacked at. But I think he offers that. I mean, if given 16 games, I top 12 is absolutely in his range of outcomes, I think. And again, top 6, it's tough with the amount of targets that I expect him to get all the way home to that. But he absolutely could.
For what you paid, it'll pay off.
For what you paid, you can massively. Right. I don't think and Marvin Jones would be the other one. I think it from deep could get
habitually disrespected. Sure.
Yeah.
So the idea in that little segment is that, people going into their drafts, they can try and snag someone late that they can get some value out of. That's really what it is, and you hit it spot on. So that's awesome.
Yep.
So I think you're going to know my next show guest I'm recording with tomorrow night. It'll air a few days later, Miss Katie Flower. On the show, Katie and I are going to talk some more Dynasty, even get a little Debbie twist on it. So you're not going to want to miss out. Subscribe today so you don't miss the episode. We're going to wrap this up. But first, Jordan, remind the great people where they can find you again.
Yeah, you can find all my you can follow me on Twitter at McNamara Dynasty. You can find all my Analytics of Dynasty stuff at analyticsofdynasty.com. You can go over I have my links to all my Patreon stuff. Again, doing my podcast a day through the end of June at least. And if I'm not doing it a day, it's 4 or 5 a week usually is the pace that I'm at in terms of over there.
A lot of shows.
Yeah. And it's fun. And so you can find all my content. You can go get the book, Analytics of Dynasty, at analyticsofdynasty.com. It's a 2020 editions over there for $30. Get a copy of it. It's got a lot of the strategies we talked about, and the 2019 edition is still fully relevant. This isn't just a 1-year strategy guide in terms of, hey, pick these players. It's a strategy, and it's an evergreen strategy. And I wouldn't back away from anything I wrote about in 2019. So, that's over there on sale for $20 now. So you can get either one of those, and dive into some Dynasty if you got a little free time on your hands.
Awesome. One people, you heard them. Go sign up. 2, you said Evergreen. That took me right to the Reality Sports Online guys and their show. It's kind of funny. They always say the Evergreen stuff. So, by the way, for those who play Reality Sports Online, since you reminded me, there is a promo code that they gave me to give you guys. It's 10% off if you use the promo code Boom Says Bob. You might hear me say that once or twice on Twitter. So go use that. Get 10% off your league or your team. But that's all for this show. This has been Bob Street Show Warrior and special guest Jordan McNamara. Damn it. Ruin it again. Reminding you that soon enough you'll be able to hit the waiver wire, set your lineups, dominate your opponents, and let's go win some championships together. Bye.